Well, this is a Chinese C2 class steam locomotive. It's owned by a group of regular volunteers at the Ffestiniog and Welsh Highland Railways, and it's been here about 15 years nearly now. We've been gradually working through an overhaul, complete strip down and rebuild and regauging to suit the railways here, with the intention that it will eventually form part of the operating fleet. We're hoping that it will be useful in the future when we may have to burn a wider variety of fuels. It's designed to work on poor coal. Standing next to it here, the locomotive looks very large, and it is quite a big loco. It's got a big boiler, relatively small wheels, but actually they're no smaller than Prince's. So it's perfectly capable of 20 mile an hour. And with the big cylinders here, it's a pretty powerful loco as well. It's not perhaps quite a double fairly, but nearly equal to one. One of the things we've had to do to make it suitable for the Ffestiniog is to regauge the frames. It was originally 762mm gauge. It's now, to suit the Ffestiniog, it's 600mm gauge. There were a few of these locos originally built to the narrower gauge, but they didn't survive. Also, to make it fit the Ffestiniog, we've had to reduce the size of the cab. And the loco, when we bought it, had a very large cab, very wide, came out to about here. But we actually found some old photographs of it when it was first built, which showed it with a smaller cab. Not much bigger than this mock-up we've built. Why have we built this mock-up out of wood? Well, we want to make sure it fits. We want to prove that this will fit up the Ffestiniog between the narrow walls, through the Garneth Tunnel, with its tight clearances up the top. And that's what we're here to do today. We're going to take it for a run up the line this evening and measure the clearances. We're pretty confident it will fit because we've built it within the loading gauge, but we want to make sure before we go to the time and effort of building the new cab in the metal. Also, got to remember that whether this fits with the infrastructure is also influenced by the position of the track and by the position of the structures around the railway. And both of those things can move too. So it's always a good idea to do a practical double check, even if it fits on paper. That's right. Okay, moving back.
hello again. Welcome back to Glamputh. You join us on the Sunday of the working party that I spoke about in our last update to you, where we're now working on a much more dismantled mountaineer. As you can see, all the boiler cladding has been removed. This has revealed all the surfaces of the boiler. As you can see, there's still paint left on from when it last had its 10-year overhaul. And you can see things like the dome, and towards the firebox, and you can see like the ends of the stays to see if any of them have been leaking or are broken. And you can get a bit further in to where the washout plugs are to feel round to see if you can feel any grooving. And the next stage with that will be to get one of those little endoscopes that you can plug into your phone, and we'll have a look to see if anything looks particularly awry in the on the boiler. But one of our volunteers who was here yesterday, who does repairing steam engines for a living, had a look, and he's come across some pretty questionable boilers, let's say, and he wasn't terribly fazed by what he could see here with the Mountaineer. So that is a good first sign, but we still have to do all the official exams, non-destructive testing and all that, and lots of thickness testing. But so far it's looking good, and it's looking a lot lighter. All the sand domes and boiler cladding, they're off. They're all very well made. They've also got silver paint still left on them on the inside. They're not particularly rusty apart from surface rust, and so hopefully they'll just need shot blasting and a new coat of paint, and might need a few mods if we change anything, but they'll be ready to go back on the engine at some point in the future. We're taking off all the boiler lagging and the cladding this far, so we're taking off the 3 rings that you've seen on the floor going around the main boiler barrel and out the firebox end. We've taken the 2 throat plate bits off that split, and we're now left with this top section, which is mostly sandwiched on by the cab. This has involved taking off the foot plating brackets. There were little squares of foot plate. It didn't go all the way along under the tanks, but we've had to unbolt those, and the handbrake has been removed as well, with chocks being placed under the wheels just to stop it going anywhere, not that it would do because the shed's flat. Yes, we'll move on to the cab to show you what's no longer there. Right, so we're inside the cab now. All the controls have been removed. We're just left with mostly just the back head of the boiler. We just have some of the conversion bosses for the water gauge glasses and the regulator valve to remove. You just need to bring up some oxyacetylene gas to heat up the nuts before we remove those to preserve the studs in the boiler. All the cladding has come off. We've had to mostly drill out pop rivets, which is the standard way of putting the cladding together that the works use. On some areas it had been spot welded to bits of the framework, whether this was something that was done later on at its last overhaul. But all the gauges have removed. Any control rods that disappear out of the cab to other bits of the engine have been disconnected, and we're now just at the latter stage of making sure we can lift the cab off. The back is now about 2 inches off the back of the frames, and the front we're just undoing 4 more bolts that we've uncovered on the side of the firebox to hopefully remove the cab and prove that it's free, ready, as I said before, for a telehandler to come and take it off the loco. Once the cab has been confirmed as detached, and the little bit of firebox cladding at the front hopefully can be removed at the end of today, next we'll be working on the cylinder cladding and the ends, unbolt those. We'll have to take any more lubrication lines off. There'll be the drain cocks underneath that need to come apart. We know that because there's lovely pictures on the internet of where this engine has come off the track at Harbour Station, sort of off the head shunt, and unfortunately it's clobbered those drain cock valves at various times, so some of the bosses are not quite at right angles in the cylinders, which we'll have to look at resolving. And then, so once the cladding's off, we'll see what the outside is like, take all the lagging off. Hopefully there's not any horrid corrosion where water's been sitting on one part of the cylinder while it's been stored. Our main concern really is the bottom half of the casting, because that's still the original from 1916 when it was built. But getting all the steam pipes off is going to be a bit of a challenge, because they've been on there for probably about 20 years or so, which doesn't make things very easy to take apart. But yes, that is where we're up to. Hopefully next time, as I said, next time more bits are coming apart. Just to quell any questions that some people have, the mountaineer will be restored to the condition it was before we took it apart, effectively, with some small modifications just to make a few bits of it better and more current with what the row is more able and can afford to do in the works, like little changes. There's not going to be anything drastic. We're going to mount the boiler slightly differently, which I think I've said before, just to preserve the frames once they're realigned. And obviously there's a lot, Paul will probably say a lot about what fuel we're using in the future, but as we're at this early stage of the restoration, that is not our key concern. We've taken the oil firing equipment out, we've not thrown it in the bin. There's plenty of room for it to be coal-fired, so whatever we're asked to by the time we have a 10-year ticket, we're more than capable of doing either or option. It's not a crucial thing. So if you'd like to come and help us out, we've got lots to do on the engine. We're now at a stage where you can come and start cleaning things. We might get a shot blaster in at some stage, so then there'll be lots of painting to do to keep things all preserved. Just drop me an email, which I'm sure will appear somewhere on the screen. And if you wish to donate, the Ffestiniog Railway Society or our usual website for some merchandise, which I am told by our man in charge of that, Bruce, we are getting some new merchandise in, so please look out for that. Every little penny helps, really, to returning the Mountaineer to steam. Thank you very much.
I think it's made better box.
Morning and welcome to Dinas Workshop. It's around 6 months since we last did a video update here on the NG15, when we just received the boiler back to Dinas and mounted it on the frames, and we also assembled the wooden mock-up cab to prove our design. So we'd like to update you today about the progress since then, where we are at the moment with the loco and what the next steps will be. So here we are in the workshop at Dinas in the South Yard. And a lot of work has progressed, albeit not all visible, as some parts are now taken off the loco and are away for shot blasting and painting. So we'll start from the top. We have worked on the interfaces between the boiler and the locomotive. That's here at the front on the smokebox saddle. There's a diaphragm plate halfway down the barrel in this design, 2 support brackets either side of the firebox, and a steadying bracket on the back head. All of those interfaces have taken quite some work, but they're all now in place, and they allow the boiler to expand and contract, fixed at the front, at the smokebox end, to expand backwards in the frames and contract again when the Loco boiler cools down. So we will hopefully see all that working well when we steam up the boiler the next time. On the boiler itself, on the outside, we've completed the crinoline rings and the crinoline frame around the firebox, which supports the cladding sheets to give the boiler its final look. Between the boiler and the sheets, the thermal insulation will be added, so you won't actually see that, but it is a wool type insulation similar to domestic insulation for lofts and cavities that goes between the two here, and that will be applied quite shortly to the Loco. We have worked on some of the fittings that go onto the boiler, so the dome is actually dome cover is completed and painted, stored elsewhere. The manhole cover there with the whistle on it, and the cladding sheets will go on, followed by these items on top of the boiler shortly afterwards, and that will complete the insulation of the boiler. We'll move then onto the cab, more of which in a moment. Where we're standing at the moment, at the front of the locomotive, you will see that the Welsh gear on this side of the Loco is now fully assembled, and also the mechanical lubricators, one on each side, are assembled on the Loco. We're now working on the drive mechanism for the lubricator and measurements and adjustments of the gear to make sure that the Loco is even on both sides and has the correct travel for the valves and pistons. There's a lot of new work into the gear, although it is an overhaul of the existing equipment. So that has taken quite some time, mainly led by the staff machinists, supported by the volunteer groups as well. We've got our new piston valves inside the valve chest here on the Loco, but without any rings at the moment until we've adjusted their position. We've also got the new piston rods inside the cylinders as well. Moving towards the back end of the Loco here, just to show you some of the progress that we've made. You can see the crinolines on the firebox and also the cladding sheets that we have almost completed. We're just working on the join here between the wrapper and also the back head plates. This will be a brass infill section as it was originally on the NG15, so that will be one of the next items that we'll be manufacturing. And the side sheets as well for the cladding on the firebox. We've already made the throat plate and the back head. Therefore, we just have these two sides to make on either side. Then those parts will also go away for shot blasting and painting, and we'll be able to put the lagging insulation also on the firebox. Also at this end of the Loco, we've worked on the inside the firebox on the ash pan watering system to keep the hot embers damp in the firebox so they don't drop out of the Loco and cause any fires. We've also worked on the carriers and the grate sections that the fire actually burns on in the firebox, and the fire hole door, as you can see there on the back head, is now finally installed on the Loco. We've additionally worked on the cab supports. This is a modification for our new cab design. We've got a step down in the running plate angle on the outside of the Loco for the new cab design, and we've also modified the existing outriggers on the Loco, which come off the main frames here, and designed and made these supports that will provide a cab floor and also a strong structure for the cab to sit on. We've also installed the cab floor pieces around the back of the Loco on the extension and the modified footplate steps as well, and mounted the back head on the engine there. And below the running plate level, we've worked on the brake gear for the Loco, which is now assembled underneath, and the steam brake cylinder here. There's only the return spring, which we need to assemble onto a carrier up here, and then the Loco brake gear can be tested on air, and it's ready for operation with steam. We've also worked on the suspension in the meantime. We checked that the Loco was able to move all of its wheel sets in freedom over various undulations in the track. There was one or two issues there, which we've managed to free off, and also adjust the suspension so that the equalised suspension throughout the complete Loco is now sitting level and is all operating as it should. So here we are with the tender in the workshop behind the loco. We've positioned it like this for the last month in order to work on the interfaces between the two as well, which has been very helpful. We continued to work inside the tank in order to get the mountings for the injector water takeoffs at the front of the loco, which are now complete, and to paint and seal inside the tank finally. We were also able to fill the water tank, check for no leaks, and the good news was no leaks. So we are ready when the time comes to pipe up the tender to the loco. We're still working on some fabrication on the tender at the front for the toolboxes and the sandboxes that will go at the front of the tender, and also the handbrake mechanism. A lot of work has been undertaken on the brake gear underneath the tender. That's now ready for the handbrake mechanism itself to connect to it and the vacuum cylinder to be piped up. Also, leaning up against the tender here, we've got a couple of new items delivered this week. So our cab front plate and cab side plates, profile cut in order to assemble, and also a little joke from our painter, appealing to a sponsor that we don't yet have on the project to see if they'd like to help us. But one or two of our volunteers are connected with that company, so they thought they'd have a little joke on that one. Other than that, the tender is going to move shortly for another paint, sanding, filling and painting in order to achieve the required finish. It's a temporary paint coat on there at the moment in order to stop any corrosion during the period of the overhaul, but we'll soon be putting the final touches to that and then moving to paint the locomotive as well. Okay, a final update from us today on the NG15. There's an awful lot of work standing behind me in the cladding sheets that we've made over the last 3 to 4 months on the loco. It's involved some pretty amusing moments working with a large mangle to feed the sheets in and roll them in order to get the right curve on there, and then lots of precise measurement and cutting for the various holes and slots we need for the equipment that's mounted to the boiler to come through the cladding in the right way so that it will look smart in the final installation. And these have just come back to us a few days ago after blasting and priming, and we're now going to be working these up into the final paint scheme for the loco for its running in first few months when we test out the loco and hopefully find not too many gremlins, and we can then decide when we bring the loco into the main traffic. So here we've got cladding sheets for the boiler barrel, 2 sides to each ring on the barrel, and also the cladding sheets for the cylinders as well at the back here, which were made some time ago but have just been blasted and primed at the same time as the boiler barrel.